Deputy Speaker. I do think it's a shame this bill has been rushed through this House so rapidly. Members have really had a short amount of time to get to grips with what is a rather technical and lengthy piece of legislation. And I think the small number of amendments tabled today speak to the incredibly tight time limits which have been put in place. And given the impact of this legislation on businesses operating across Northern Ireland and Great Britain, that does concern me and should concern us all. And for me, it speaks really to the heart of the many contradictions of Brexit between what was promised in 2016 and indeed what is being delivered today. We were told that Parliament was going to take back control, but this executive, peopled by the same individuals who made those promises, has arguably more contempt for the legislature than any before it. And I think that's summed up by the incredibly depressing piece of legislation which was presented a couple of weeks ago to repeal the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which actually attempts to engineer the first ever return of powers from the legislature to the executive in our history. But those contradictions do not end here, and a case in point is Clause 6 of this bill, which is the uprating of fuel duty for aviation gasoline. And that, for me, is a microcosm of the whole Brexit process. The whole point of Brexit was to get our sovereignty back, was it not? So that we could finally write our own laws rather than follow bureaucratic regulations from Brussels. The sort of stiflingly dull directives with boring names, names like EU Energy Tax Directive, brackets Council Directive 2003/96/EC. You might have thought that directive was exactly the sort of red tape we might finally cut through in Brexit Britain. And yet this piece of legislation proves that the reality is far removed from the rhetoric, because EU Energy Tax Directive, brackets Council Directive 2003/96/EC, close brackets, which ensures that across the EU a minimum level of tax is applied on a whole type of aircraft fuel, is in this bill actually being applied across the whole of the UK. The explanatory notes rather patriotically inform us that the UK is not bound to comply with the directive in respect of Great Britain from 1st of January 2021, but nonetheless Great Britain is complying with it anyway. And doesn't that say a lot about Brexit and the current trade negotiations, where effectively the government has been toying with the idea of taking maximum tariff pay now in order to allow regulatory divergence that in all likelihood isn't going to take place? I'll turn now to the amendments. I agree with the amendments 1, 2 and new clause 3 tabled in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. Economic assessments have been conspicuously lacking over the past few months, COVID notwithstanding, both of the impact of any potential deal with the EU, but also the Secretary of State for International Trade's refusal to tell us whether any of the trade deals she struck will actually leave us any better off than our current trading relationships. And the other conspicuous absentee when it comes to the economic impact of all of this is the Chancellor. I find it very surprising that he has said very little when it comes to the threat of no deal, and during a time which the UK finds itself in the midst of its worst economic crisis. So I think it is entirely right that we carry out proper economic assessments of all of this, not least for Northern Ireland. I remember during the election campaign last year when the Prime Minister was caught on camera telling Northern Ireland businesses, and I quote, "Northern Ireland has got a great deal. You keep free movement, you keep access to the single market." In the words of the Foreign Secretary, Northern Ireland has a cracking deal because of its access to the EU market. But meanwhile, as we teeter on the edge of no deal, we're told by the Culture Secretary that things will be choppy, but we'll survive. Well, I'm sure those words will be a comfort to many of my constituents. Finally, I want to turn to amendments NC1 and NC2. During the Internal Market Bill earlier, I spoke about what a disaster the notwithstanding clauses in that piece of legislation were for the future of the UK and elsewhere. I won't repeat myself because exactly the same applies here. And all I do ask is for the Minister to give a guarantee that if there is no deal with the EU, international law-breaking clauses will not be introduced in this or indeed in any future business. We cannot afford to let a no-deal scenario be a proxy for further actions which are hugely damaging to our international reputation. And for that to be the UK's first action once it has left the EU would be a truly regrettable matter indeed.